When it comes to stories in video games, you can usually rate them on a scale from terrible, to decent, to better than expected. And then there's those games whose stories are absolutely so amazing that they actually make you rethink everything you thought you knew about video game narratives. You'll never guess what game falls into that category. The House in Fata Morgana is a visual novel, wait, don't leave yet, developed by Novectel in 2012 for the PC, with a console remaster released in 2019, which I'm going to be referring to for this video. The PC version isn't bad or anything like that in case you're wondering, it's just old. But I would say that the remaster is more worth playing compared to the PC version. Not only does it boast a higher resolution in widescreen format, it also has newly drawn CG illustrations and backgrounds which frankly look way better. Not to mention it also comes bundled with the Prologue DLC as well as a few extra bonus goodies. Now, normally I like to include a little satirical quip in my thumbnails and titles, but not this time, because this time I chose a pretty naked lady. I truly do mean it when I say that this is the greatest story ever told in a video game. But hey, if you don't believe me, just look at that 96 Metacritic score. So let me tell you all about the House in Fata Morgana, is what I would like to say. You see, despite that very audacious claim of greatest video game story ever I just made, the House in Fata Morgana is actually pretty difficult to talk about. And there's two very big reasons for that, so I'll try my best. The first big reason is the genre itself. Fata Morgana is a visual novel, or text adventure game in the most traditional sense. There's not really much gameplay per se, just reading thousands of text boxes with the occasional dialogue choice to alter the story's path. It's kinda hard to sell a game when all you're doing is, well, this. Especially when other games in the genre offer more interactivity to keep your attention instead of non-stop reading. Also, there's no voice acting either in this game, technically, which doesn't really help out much either. Would it be nice to have? Sure, but I'm not really losing sleep over it, because I'm actually losing sleep by playing this game for 15 hours straight. True story, by the way. The second reason the House in Fata Morgana is hard to talk about is because of the story itself. It's one of those games that falls into the category of, you can only play it once. Because the House in Fata Morgana isn't just a game, it's an experience. It's the kind of game that makes you wish you could erase your memory just to play it again for the very first time. It's also one of those games where practically everything is a spoiler in some way, which frankly made it really hard to splice together footage for this video because I had to tiptoe around so much stuff to not give away anything big. The best way I would describe the story in House in Fata Morgana is, it's a gothic horror-themed romance story told over hundreds of years and multiple lifetimes. You, yes you, wake up in a big dark room in a big dark house, greeted by a big dark maid calling you master. You don't know her, but she certainly seems to know you. And to add on to your little conundrum, you don't even know who you are, or how or why you ended up in this house in the first place. The only information you have to go off of is that you're a spirit, and that's kind of it. The maid explains that the house, or well, mansion, is a place that exists beyond time and space that draws in souls connected to it from the afterlife, all due to the curse of a vengeful witch that still haunts its halls. The maid offers to help you regain your memories of who you really are so you can pass on. She does this by escorting you around the house and letting you look through its literal doors to the past. Each door presenting a different version of the house throughout history and the various residents who lived in it, with the main goal of seeing if you show up in one of these different time periods so you can find out who you really are, what your connection to the house is, and maybe lift the curse along the way. Of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, as each door you peer through always tells a tale of tragedy. Because behind every door, there's always the maid, and a very bad ending for everyone involved. The first door tells the story of a brother and sister whose lives are turned upside down when a new maid is hired into their servitude. The brother, Mel, ends up falling for the new maid, much to the disdain of his sister Nellie, who becomes increasingly jealous of their relationship. Seeing the brother who once spoiled her with attention doing the same to someone else sends her into a fit as she vies for her brother's affection. Of course, not all is as it seems, because the new maid also seems to have a hidden motivation for coming to the house and some very interesting plans for Nellie's dearest brother Mel. The second door tells the story of a monster named Bestia, who hid away in the house after escaping from a nearby village that attacked it. All Bestia yearns for is a life of peace, but that's easier said than done. Being the monster it is, it can't contain its urges for blood and violence. Thus it begins luring in unsuspecting travelers with the promise of sanctuary, only to viciously murder them and defile their corpses. Meanwhile, a young woman named Pauline travels to the remote village in search of her missing lover, who supposedly died in a shipwreck, whom she believes is still alive. The third door is about a man named Jacopo, a hot-headed mafia man out to make a name for himself in the business world. Abusive to his wife and his servants, not including his childhood best friend, he locks himself into a psychological battle of paranoia as he grows ever suspicious of his wife having an affair with another man. Jacopo, unable to trust anyone around him, increases his tyrannical tendencies to try and hold on to what little sanity he has left. But is his wife actually cheating on him? Or is it just a conspiracy that he's fallen victim to? Who can really say? After all, Jacopo is a very bad man with tons of enemies out to get him. The fourth and final door tells the story of a man named Michel and his lonely existence, imprisoned in the house due to being the bearer of a terrible curse in which everything he touches dies. One day, he's greeted to a young girl seeking refuge from a band of knights hunting her down for being a heretic. Thus, the two spend their days together isolated from the world, growing close to one another as Michel struggles to learn about love and companionship while having the fear that he could accidentally end the girl's life with the touch of a finger. Wait, what did that say? And I know I said that each door holds a tragedy behind it, but it's not all doom and gloom the entire time. There's highlights of comedy sprinkled throughout, as well as moments where the characters do or say things that are just downright adorable, which honestly makes the heavier parts of the game hit all the harder. The writer definitely knew what he was doing here, and he is so evil for it. The characters are all complex and unique, fully realized in the best way. There's no real morally just or evil characters here, just people driven to do horrible things or meet horrible ends by way of circumstance. It's very easy to go from loving and adoring a character to absolutely hating and despising them, and vice versa. Each tale is absolutely enthralling thanks to the excellent writing on display. There's tons of clever wordplay with various things the characters say, like happiness is always better sooner rather than later, which drop hints of things to come. It's actually pretty fun to puzzle everything together and try to guess at what's going on as you read through the story. The writing is really good at keeping you on your toes, gaslighting you into thinking you know what's going to happen, only to pull the rug out from under you and subvert your expectations. The structure of everything is so tightly spun right down to the most minute details. Things you'd only give a passing glance, like a random diary entry or the color of someone's eyes, are absolutely relevant and will get referenced much later on when you've nearly forgotten about them, leading to those aha moments that are always great to have. If you've ever taken a creative writing or film class, you've probably been told that the best kind of plot twist is the one that's shown at the very beginning of a story, but not directly told, hidden in plain sight. And it's that kind of detail Fata Morgana's writing presents that makes combing through its thousands of lines of text worthwhile. Of course, this is also what I would say is Fata Morgana's biggest downside. I love the game, but it's long. And I don't just mean that it's long. I mean, it's long. There were many times where I thought that I was nearing the climax and almost finished with the game, only for something to happen to keep the story going. I would look at my playtime and see that I was 20 hours in, thinking I was nearly done, only for that 20 hours to turn into 25, and then 30, and then so on. It's an extremely slow burn that does take a while to fully ignite, which will definitely turn a lot of people away. And I'll fully admit there were times when even I got a little tired and overwhelmed with all the reading because some sections dragged on way longer than I felt necessary. Though, contrary to that, I never felt burnt out or like I needed to take a break from the game either, but that might have been due to the whole losing sleep bit I played on earlier, which really did happen, by the way. The story is so engrossing that on more than one occasion, I found myself pulling all-nighters. I would look at the clock, thinking that I had only played for about an hour or two, only to find out that I had actually been playing non-stop for 7 hours. And then before I knew it, the sun was rising, and whoops, it's already mid-afternoon, and I still hadn't stopped playing or taken a break. I know I said the burn was slow, but when it really gets going and that flame fully ignites, it's like an explosion and it's hard to put down. The payoff to it all is so massive that it goes beyond mere satisfaction. This is greatly helped by the game's main message of communication. Almost 100% of the tragedy that happens to everyone could have easily been avoided if the characters just properly talked and listened to each other instead of skirting around their issues and actually said what they really meant. But unfortunately, they're human, and humans are flawed, emotional creatures that act irrationally, and so they suffer for it. It's pretty personal for me to say this, but around the time I first played Fata Morgana, I had a really bad falling out with a friend I held dear, and the lack of communication was the biggest factor to that tragedy happening. So, imagine my surprise when I see these characters going through the same thing I was going through, and even more so, the lessons the game was teaching with them. Call me cringe, but this game was there for me when I needed it most and had no one else to lean on. It's like the game was talking directly to me, teaching me its lesson alongside the characters. Sometimes I do wish I could make amends and reconcile with that person and become friends again, but I think that's enough personal talk for now. I really do hold this game in the highest of regards though. So, let's talk about something else. Like the graphics. Now, obviously this game is a visual novel, so the visual part has to mean something, right? I mean, if you're going to be reading a bunch of text boxes, you might as well have something nice to look at that will pair well with all the words on screen. After all, visuals can definitely leave a big impact and help convey a story, and unless you're blind or tabbed out, then it's easy to see that Fata Morgana's graphics more than suffice to fill that need. Most visual novels go for that generic anime look, but Fata Morgana is built different. It goes for a style more painterly and realistic, while also keeping a hint of that anime look to it for extra flair. It's far more elegant looking than the standard fare that this genre is mostly plagued with. And no, I'm not saying that the standard anime style is bad or anything, just look at me for instance, but it is uninspired, and it definitely would not fit the tone that this game is going for. One of the biggest comparisons I see people make in regards to the art style is Castlevania. Well, the older ones, which also falls under the gothic horror category. And no, it's not the same artist if you were wondering, but I wouldn't fault you for thinking so. The artist's name is Moyotaro, and he does a near-perfect job at capturing the image and atmosphere of this game's story. All of his renders are done with insane detail. The coloring and lighting in particular are jaw-dropping. These are incredible works of art, and I could easily see them hanging in museums and art galleries. Take this picture of Pauline for instance. See the way the light of the sun bounces off of the bright blue water and flows seamlessly into the hue of her hair, highlighting every delicate strand? And that leads you to gaze into her beautiful amber eyes that gleam with light, radiating her beauty across the ocean as the sun bounces off of her soft, perfect skin, drawing you into her cute, kissable lip. Yeah, the art's good. Don't look at me like that. Honestly, the only real criticism I have against the art is the anatomy of some characters. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, or why Mel has one arm that is way bigger than the other, but I'll never be able to unsee it, and now neither will you. Though, to be fair, these character portraits are from like 12 years ago, and Moyotaro had an entire decade to improve his craft, which he definitely did as seen by the new CG illustrations. Do I wish that he could have redone the sprites to better fit the updated art style? Sure, but I know how much work that probably would have been, so I'll let it slide. Of course, visuals alone don't make a game, it has to sound good too. And I'm pleased to say that Fata Morgana's soundtrack is just as amazing as everything else in the game. Gorgeous is probably the best word I'd use to describe it. Each piece feels intricately crafted to immerse you in whatever's going on in the story. From happy to sad, fun, calming, and foreboding. And every other emotion in between. Every song perfectly fits the mood to enhance the experience. There's a wide variety on display here. Between the main game and DLC, there's more than 80 different songs composed for Fata Morgana. And while some of them do repeat, and none of them have good loops, they're all still a treat to the ears. Not to mention, they're also memorable that when they do pop up throughout the game, it's like reuniting with an old friend you haven't seen in ages. More than half the tracks have vocals accompanying them, which further adds on to the experience. And what's most interesting is that all the songs are sung in Portuguese. Normally with most Japanese games that have vocal tracks in their background music, they're usually sung in English, Japanese, Latin, or some made-up language fitting that game's universe. Call me ignorant, but I did originally think that all of this was sung in a made-up language because I've never actually heard Portuguese spoken before, much less sang. But I do find it to be a very beautiful language that I'd like to learn more about. And even though I couldn't understand anything in the lyrics, just by them being there greatly enhanced my experience. Though, funnily enough, according to my actually Portuguese friend, the songs might as well have been sung in a made-up language anyways, because apparently the pronunciation is so bad it's nigh understandable. Still cool that they tried using the language though. I will say the mixing of the songs is a little weird though, but I think that might be on purpose. It's purely my own speculation, but I have seen others online point it out as well. But it feels like the sound design is trying to mimic that of a stage play or an opera, which does make sense when you think about it. After all, you are experiencing all these memories from an outside perspective, like an audience member watching a play. Everything I've talked about thus far also applies to the game's prequel DLC, A Requiem for Innocence. Except, this time the story isn't told from an outside perspective, but from that of the game's antagonist. It serves as an origin story that shows us how the mansion came to be, as well as the witch that originally cursed it. I highly recommend not playing this DLC before the main game, as it does heavily rely on player knowledge of the events that happened in it. If the main game was all about love and tragedy, then this DLC is all about anger and fear. The gruesomeness is turned up to 11 this time around, not only in just the writing that was already very explicit with its depictions of violence, but also its visuals too. Whoops, can't show that on YouTube. It's a story about climbing out of the darkest pit imaginable, only to be pushed back down even further. Everything hits so much harder as you watch these characters grasp at the tiniest glimmer of hope, just to have it forcibly ripped away over and over. Seeing everything from the antagonist's point of view is a real eye-opener, and a great display for how well crafted the story, characters, and world are. Like, these are characters I went from hating and cursing in the main game, to loving and crying over in the DLC. Just like the main game, there's also a lesson to be learned here as well. Except the message this time around isn't something so strict like communication, but instead is more reassuring, weirdly enough. It teaches you that the world is harsh and unforgiving, and bad things happen to good people who don't deserve it. And it's okay to be sad, or angry, or scared. You don't have to carry your emotions alone. You're human, and that's perfectly fine. Your feelings are valid. Despite all the torture and heartbreak this prequel serves, the ending itself is so cathartic and heartwarming that it actually made me cry. Well, the ending to the main game also made me cry too, but I think I actually like the DLC's ending more? I'm still on the fence on which is my favorite. They're both really good, okay? The House in Fata Morgana is truly a special game and is indeed, if not one of the best stories ever told in gaming history. And frankly, it's one of the best romance stories ever told, period. Need I remind you of the Metacritic score? I know it's heresy to say this, but if they made a TV drama adaptation of this game with little to no changes, I can guarantee it would go down in history as one of the greatest TV shows ever made. Yes, I do want that to happen. It's just a shame that Fata Morgana is locked away in a genre that most gamers won't really jive with. Then again, people really like walking simulators and games that are basically movies anyways, which is really the same thing when you think about it, so maybe all they need is a little push. It's a game with a slow burn that most probably won't want to try and venture through despite the monumental payoff. Not to mention it's definitely not for the faint of heart. Despite being labeled as horror, it's not really that scary. But it is very explicit and emotionally draining. Some of the scenes you come across can be stomach-churning, which will unfortunately filter people out. I really do wish I could erase my memory and experience this game for the first time all over again. Though, watching other people's playthroughs and seeing their reactions is also quite fun as well. The House in Fata Morgana is an amazing game and has earned a special place in my heart. It has cemented itself as one of my favorite games of all time. It's enriched my life and I'll never forget it as long as I live. And I'm greatly looking forward to Novak's next project, which I'm sure will be another masterpiece. Okay, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Bye. God, I just want to kiss Pauline so badly. Is that too much to ask?